obviously psilocybin, MDMA, ayahuasca, all these things are illegal. You can't really get access to them without breaking the law. In a world in the future where everything is legalized, where does ketamine fit in terms of the options for people? Like who, if there is legal MDMA, psilocybin, ayahuasca, ibogaine, DMT, and ketamine, like who would you say ketamine is specifically for? Who should pick ketamine of all those options? Is it meant for people with a certain background, PTSD, depression, something like that? Like how do you see it fitting into the ultimate suite of psychedelics?
I think there are a few directions. One is that ketamine, I think there's a couple. One, despite I think some of the sort of preconceived viewpoints on it, like you said, the sort of horse tranquilizer,
Yeah,
which is technically false. It's a horse anesthetic.
get it right, guys.
Yeah, but it's also an anesthetic that's used in the emergency room of every hospital in the United States. So it's on the World Health Organization's list of world's most essential medicines because it's one of the safest anesthetics and analgesics that we have. But it definitely has that as a reputation as the horse tranquilizer. So despite that, it's actually a pretty light experience for people. And so it's a pretty good sort of starter psychedelic medicine to get people accustomed to an altered state of consciousness. If you were, starting people off, some people might start with like holotropic breath work to see how they handle an altered state. Some people, they might move to like ketamine, maybe MDMA, before getting into psilocybin or LSD, and ultimately, DMT and ayahuasca, which are very incredibly intense experiences. In addition to, maybe where it's at on the intensity or I don't know skill curve, it also has a really short duration. So MDMA, can last like 3, but really if you're doing it therapeutically, you might do it twice, like 4 to 6, 7 hours. Psilocybin pretty similar. LSD can be like 6 to 12. Ketamine lasts about an hour. Sometimes as short as like 30 to 45 minutes if you're doing it through IV or intramuscular injection. And so that can be pretty accessible for people if they need to access these things more frequently. So if you have anxiety or depression and something you're working on consistently and you need to be able to dive into something like this ad hoc, without taking up a whole day and needing to find somebody to support you in person, ketamine can be effective for that. One of my viewpoints too, which I don't know if this is backed by any like clinical research yet, although Mindbloom is running what I think is going to be one of the biggest clinical studies in psychedelic history right now.
Nice.
On our patient population. Yeah. Is that because ketamine works on the glutamate system as an antagonist versus the serotonin system as an agonist, so it kind of cuts off the system. It has these like out of body subjective experiences and effects. So I think it can also be really effective for people who have a mindfulness practice, because if you are able to sort of surf the ketamine experience and let go, you can go pretty deep into the experience, even at like a pretty light or medium therapeutic dose. Whereas some other serotoninogenic psychedelics, mindfulness and being able to navigate the experience can be helpful, but you're kind of like strapped to a rocket ship and along for the ride.
Definitely.
In addition, ketamine doesn't seem to have some of the like neurotoxicity of say like MDMA. And because it's a little more accessible for people who are looking to, I think, drive behavioral change, I think what we're going to see is my hypothesis is that when we really figure out how to apply ketamine as a neurotechnology, I think it's going to be one of the even more effective medicines to help drive long-term behavioral change for people, because it's creating this 3 to 14-day neuroplastic window potentially. And so, Mindbloom, for instance, we give people 6 sessions over like 1 to 3 months. And I think they can compound on each other because people are sort of stacking these neuroplastic windows as they're trying to make changes in their life. Whereas with something like psilocybin, you're kind of giving somebody a jolt and, hoping that can really reset them and put them on a right path, which clinical research shows that it does.
Yeah.
But
well, you actually were the first person that brought this up. Isn't there a limit to basically how many good MDMA experiences you get before your body adapts to it?
Yeah, it's like colloquially known as losing the magic. So after a certain amount of MDMA experiences, there seems to be, especially with MDMA, a significant amount of long-term tolerance that develops. And we don't really know why. It might just be like the brain sort of becoming rigid and, realizing like what's going on,
Yeah.
and just sort of like building that tolerance. We see that with a lot of drugs. There's also it seems to be some cross tolerance across psychedelics, even with alcohol. Like people who drink or like alcoholics who drink a lot of alcohol in general are less sensitive and have more
Huh.
tolerance even to things like psychedelics. There's some research around cross tolerance of all these things and long term tolerance. So
Yeah,
if
that's why I don't do MDMA for funsies anymore. I didn't realize that every time I did it for fun, it would cost me the ability to do it therapeutically down the line.
yeah, no free lunches.
Yeah. What was the question you were going to ask, Troy?
Well, it might take us away, but
Yeah, go for it.
I'll actually stick on this just for a second because you had asked. I'll give you my subjective perspective on ketamine because we've done it. I've done ketamine now. I did it, sat in your office when you guys were doing it in office. Did it the gravity chair with the gravity blanket. Listened to a Sam Harris YouTube video, and
That's
then
my living room now.
and then I got 4 doses from you, which I did in my own place. So, and then a facilitator gave me ketamine while I was on an MDMA based experience. So just based on that, I can say that you mentioned the shortness of ketamine is nice. So I was in MDMA feeling a bit stuck in the moment, and she introduced a little bit of ketamine, which, there's constraints on how much your body can take. It's a very short, like, deepener in that MDMA experience, which allows you sort of to move through things. So I think that has space. At home, you mentioned, to me, and I'm curious what you think, the one that I've been most impressed by and can most widely recommend, presuming legality, would be MDMA in terms of the profundity of its impact and those sorts of things. Ayahuasca I see as much more challenging and difficult, and now no longer recommend to beginners, even though I did it as a total novice.
Yeah.
Like, that is not the one that I recommend people start with, even though that was all I was familiar with. And ketamine today I recommend for people who are fearful of the legality of it, want something that they can try at home, specifically anxiety or something like that, and want a quick taste of what it can be. But I still see, not to say one is better or worse, if I could only give somebody one, knowing just a little bit about them, it would likely be MDMA. As Mind Bloom expands, not to ask you to pick a favorite, but what do you see being like the backbone or the structure of how people heal, evolve, those kind of things? I know we've kind of been talking about this, but I want to talk outside of just ketamine. Like, what is the cornucopia of psychedelic treatment look like in your mind? Because you are someone that actually, I think, introduced us to ayahuasca, right? You're the guy that did it all in terms of bringing us into this world.
Dylan's the godfather. A lot of people have Dylan to thank for their first psychedelic experience.
Yes.
To answer your question directly, I mean, MDMA changed my life.
Yeah.
I mean, MDMA, especially for people who are cognizers, so people who are maybe process the world more through their heads and not, their emotions.
Yeah.
I think, at least in my experience and from seeing other people do it, and looking at like what the actual neurochemical and pharmacological effects are, like it's can be a life-changing experience. For me, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I grew up with a family with a lot of mental illness and sort of a turbulent home, and was super achievement oriented, and got out and went to a top school and was the first person in my family to go to college, and thought I had it all figured out. Started studying positive psychology and learned that I was like very miserable. And I was both miserable, but also like a miserable person. Like I was not friendly. I was not nice. I had friends, but I was tribal. I didn't like humanity and the world. And I didn't like people if I met them. I looked at them through a filter of like why I wouldn't like them. And I had a friend who, pushed me to try MDMA. And I grew up in the attic to my house, my mom, and so I was like really terrified of, illegal drugs, but thought something had to change. And I really trusted them, and it like totally catalyzed for me a complete, emotional transformation into being someone who could be an optimist and could be someone who related to others in the world and liked humans and humanity.
When was that? When did you do that?
It was like 12 or 13 years ago.
Like 19, 20. Yeah. So
I'm just curious because I saw the transformation. Dylan used to get in fist fights with friends just because you just had a lot of rage in you. I think because for people who don't know, you had a very tough upbringing. You mentioned your mom was an addict, and it was noticeable amongst the friend group, like the giant personal transformation you had into somebody who was loving, complimentary, hugged friends, really positive, from someone who was at first very, I think, angry because of the situation you grew up in.
I didn't identify myself as somebody who had a lot of anger, but once it melts away, you see like, whoa, I think Naval Ravikant has this quote about like anger is like holding a hot coal waiting to throw it at somebody else. You're the one experiencing all this pain inside, just directing it at somebody who doesn't even know. And you're like just going around. I mean, literally your internal world is a maelstrom for no reason. And so, MDMA for me was really powerful because all of a sudden, for the first time, I felt this like deep empathogenic or emotional connection to other people. I like loved people for the sake of just being people. And I started to connect with people. And it wasn't overnight, but yeah, I mean, it was literally life-changing. I wouldn't be who I am or where I am without that. And then these other psychedelic medicines have helped me also both continue to reinforce how important my relationships are and my connections to people. Like we're social animals, and if you decide you're going to be a pariah, and you might just have your tribe, but you're going to do it all on your own, you can't get very far. You're not going to accomplish anything very challenging or complex in this world if you can't organize and collaborate and partner up with other people. And that was definitely the path that I was going on. And then, I think they also, for me, have really reinforced a lot of perspective. So, I mean, I want to call them like mental models, but there's so many moments throughout my day where I like stop and regain perspective on something.
Sure.
So like, say somebody cuts me off in traffic, like the moment I get angry, I like stop and think about Hanlon's razor and the fundamental attribution bias, if you're familiar. So like Hanlon's razor is the idea that like don't attribute to malice or malcontent what can be attributed to just like ignorance or incompetence.
Sure. Yeah, or even the fact that person might have a pregnant wife in the car. That's something I always try for. It's like, okay, this person cut me off. Maybe it's because they're a dick, or maybe it's because someone they love is dying, or some, you know what I mean? They're just on a more important journey than I am while I go surfing or to the grocery store or whatever.
Totally.
Go ahead. I don't want to cut this off. I have another direction.
Well, I was just going to say the fundamental attribution bias is the idea that every time you have a success, you're like, oh, it's because I'm really skillful, right? Like I'm the man. And every time you have a failure, you're like, oh, I got unlucky. Or anytime you cut somebody off, you're like, well, I'm just busy. That's a mistake. That's an outlier situation, and vice versa. Anytime someone else is successful, you're like, oh, they got lucky. Anytime they fail, you're like, yeah, it's because they're not competent. They're not skillful. And the same thing with like their behavior. And so when you realize you're like always running these like broken, programs through your head, and there are so many of these around like gratitude and, realizing like just how lucky we are to be alive and experience the richness of reality and just how abundant and free we are, even when you feel like you don't have something. Psychedelics have helped me see those things and continue to like reinforce those behaviors and patterns in a way that's been, profound and life-changing, and helped me go from, a dick and a pessimist and someone who's just unhappy to someone who's not. But it's been a lot of work along the way. But you guys are also on the path.
Absolutely, man.
Wearing Mind Bloom shirts.
Working on it still. Hope that you guys enjoyed that clip. If you want to see more like this and have us do more podcasts, we are 100% funded by our generous patrons. And if you'd like to contribute, there's a link in the description, and we'll have one pop up on the screen right here so that we can do more podcasts where we have fun conversations and hopefully some deep ones like this. Either way, hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.